Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Power of Your Mind podcast. You're listening to episode number 281. I'm Victoria Gallagher, the Law of Attraction hypnotist and #1 best-selling author of Practical Law of Attraction. Align yourself with the manifesting conditions and successfully attract your desires. I'm also the founder of HipTalk.com and HypnoCloud apps. Soon to be the Believe app. We will see if it's launched by this episode. But in that app, you will find about 1,000 hypnosis recordings right in the palm of your hand and much, much more. So today I have a very special guest with me, Peter Canova. Peter is a spiritual philosopher, a linguist, a historian, an author of an award-winning book called First Souls. It's a trilogy. It's a spiritual fiction series, and he approaches the multiverse theory through the twin lenses of quantum physics and ancient spiritual wisdom in his latest nonfiction book, Quantum Spirituality. And you can find out all about Peter on his website, petercanova.com. That's Peter, PeterCanova.com. And you can also find out more about him on the Pope Annalisa website, popeannalisa.com. And you can also check out his book on Amazon called Quantum Spirituality Book. And so today, Peter's going to be talking about some of his insights into quantum spirituality. So it's a very interesting, very deep topic. And I'm going to do my best to pick his brain and find out all we can find out about quantum spirituality. So welcome to the show, Peter.
Nice to be with you. Looking forward to have my brain picked.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. No, this is it's a very interesting topic. It's a little bit in a different direction, for our audience, but definitely something I know our audience would, be interested in, especially in the space of, how we can maybe tie this into, how hypnotherapy helps, how law of attraction and manifesting all kind of work into this whole quantum spirituality. And so tell us just a little bit of your background, like how did you, get started? What's your journey to get where you are right now?
Yeah. Well, really, I've been a real estate developer all my life. We have a company. My brother and I, we specialize in luxury hotels, and we built all around the country. And when I was in my 20s, I had a series of very vivid, you can call them psychic or spiritual experiences. And I found out that I was very accurate medical intuitive. And when I put the disbelief of that aside, it opened up a whole floodgate of different experiences: clairvoyance, clairaudience, remote viewing, psychometry, even psychokinesis. And this was very unexpected. I mean, I hadn't really had any foreshadowing of this prior to that time. So being a Capricorn, wasn't really satisfied just to have the experiences. I really wanted to understand the nuts and bolts behind what it was all about. So I started studying ancient spiritual texts, ancient spiritual wisdom, and eventually I got onto quantum physics. Now, you would think, well, what's the nexus there? Actually, not that much of a stretch, because they both deal essentially with the subject matters of matter, energy, and light. And that's really what the whole basis of the universe is about. Without those three things literally make reality what they are in all its forms, seen and unseen. So I started looking through it, as you said earlier, through the twin lenses. I started looking at life and the way the universe operates through these twin lenses. And you see, I think that's a much more effective way to go than either one or the other, is looking for the intersections between those disciplines, because it's like a roadmap. And really, quantum spirituality is really a roadmap for people's spiritual journeys. And like any good roadmap, you want to have at least two coordinates: north and south, latitude and longitude. And in this case, I use both science and I use ancient spiritual wisdom. And The nice thing about it is it's like the right brain and left brain reinforcing each other and pointing to the same things about the creation and about the way the world operates. So essentially, that's what it's all about. And during that study, I just noticed that I made some really remarkable discoveries, especially studying the Gnostics, who were an ancient Judeo-Christian mystical group about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. They were probably the most scientific of all the mystical traditions I've studied. And reading the Gnostic texts, I saw very clear indications of all the major modern theories of quantum physics: the Big Bang, parallel universes, the God particle, energy matter conversion, like Einstein's E equals mc squared. They are all covered in the Gnostic text. Now, not in technical terms that we use today, because they didn't have those terms back then. There were no particle colliders 2,000 years ago. But really, the parallels are very clear when you read the texts.
Interesting. Wow. I mean, so you have it just kind of caught you off guard, really. You were not even thinking about this, and then all of a sudden you just kind of had this sort of awakening in a way. And
I think that it's all about consciousness. At the end of the day, all these things, matter, light, energy, the things that we discussed, it's really all about consciousness, because it all derives from consciousness. And it was people arrive at what I call extraordinary experiences with consciousness through different doors. Now, for some people, they really set out and they seek to achieve that level. Other people, have problems in life where they hit rock bottom, and instead of just accepting the Lord Jesus as your Christ and Savior, they go a little bit further into it, and they start to understand, I want to learn about the principles of what life is all about. And some people have these spontaneous experiences. I fall into that last category. But honestly, Victoria, what it's all about, and the reason why I wrote this book, is these experiences really helped me with my life. And I think people have a couple of choices in life. They can either live down the basement or they can move up to the penthouse. Now, if you're living down the basement, you're living in a more limited and constricted world where, the world is more leading you around by the nose because you don't really understand the way it operates. But with a little work and effort, you actually can move your way on up and even hit the penthouse, where you have a clear panorama of the way life operates. And that is really empowering, because I believe that all ailments that we experience, whether they're physical, psychological, whatever, really stem from fear. And when you think about the root human condition, most of us, we don't know why we're here. We don't know what we're supposed to do. We don't know where we came from, and we don't know where we're going. When you get a better picture of how these things operate, the fear in your life subsides to a great degree. And then you can start to see the world through unfiltered lenses, the way it really is, and understand how you can exert some control over the world around you, instead of being led around, blown around like a leaf in the wind.
that is, to me, that feels so true. It really does feel like pretty much every problem, even in the world, like all the wars and everything that happens, it's all rooted in fear. And the way that we react to things is rooted in fear. And so it really does make a lot of sense that once we didn't have that fear, and you don't have that fear when you have this knowledge that you have gained about the way the world really works, and how you can, I love the way you put it, move from the basement up to the attic. So tell us just a little bit about, I mean, it's like, where do we even begin? Where does a person begin to even understand some of the things that you have been able to get in touch with?
Okay, so you mentioned the law of attraction a couple of times, so I guess that's what your audience is tuned into, and manifestation. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm a kind of person who gets annoyed at a lot of new age blather. I mean, I think people say a lot of things and they leave their audience to just take it all on faith, to believe what they're saying, to take it all on faith. So I'm much more of a practical person. What I try to do is present my audience with an arena of knowledge and let them try and take those principles, but put it into their own practice. So that it's sort of like the difference between faith and the type of knowledge I'm talking about, which is experiential knowledge, not book learning knowledge, but experiential knowledge, because that's where I want to get people. I'd like to get people to the point where they actually have their own personal experiences with higher consciousness. So then they don't have to believe me or anybody else, because they've been there and they've done that. Now, I can tell you that fire burns, but until you put your hand in the fire, you don't know that for sure. You're taking it on faith that I'm correct. When you put your hand in the fire and you feel what's there, then you own it. And so that's the type of knowledge I'm talking about. It's experiential knowledge where you actually do have these encounters with a higher degree of consciousness. So if you take a look at the old Gnostic text, essentially they started off where science is starting to move towards right now, which is a recognition that all life and all experience derives from a source consciousness. Now, materialistic science has tried to flip that paradigm in the last couple of centuries, and materialistic science is only what can be observed and experimented with and disproven. And it's a very limiting kind of view, because essentially they say that life and everything is a series of accidents that happened where, you have inorganic matter that somehow became organic, and then that started kind of combining into more complex forms, and it led to higher life forms and everything else. But that's never been proven. In fact, it's almost been disproven. And yet they still persist in this paradigm that life was a materialistic accident from the bottom up. It makes much more sense, and it eliminates so many different paradoxes in science and just, plain practical understandings, when you look at life deriving from a source consciousness. And so life is essentially a top-down process, not a bottom-up conscious process. So what this consciousness, they said in the ancient text, projected out different points of consciousness. It literally outflowed portions of itself to create different spheres of consciousness. Now, in Christian terminology, you would call these new points of consciousness angelic beings. The Gnostics called them aeons, A-E-O-N-S, which means eternities. But they were exactly the same thing that Carl Jung spoke about in his depth psychology. He called them archetypes. And archetypes for Jung were images that were guiding lights to human consciousness. So the Gnostics gave names to these archetypal images. They called them truth, mercy, justice, love. They were clearly all the high ideals that guide us in human existence. But Jung and the Gnostics both said that these are actual realities. So they're called psychoid realities, which means that they exist at a higher level of vibration or consciousness as organized forces that come to affect our lives. Now, you can think of them as beings. If you want to think of them as angels or whatever the case, that's fine, no problem. But what they really are points and sources of consciousness. Now, we are part of that conscious stream because that consciousness extended itself out to experience all spheres of creation, including the material. So what we really are is we're really spirits having a human experience. And that being the case, because we're part of this stream of consciousness, we are part of the whole manifestation of reality. We play our own portion in manifesting. Now, albeit at a very diluted basis, okay? Because the whole idea of having individual identity is tied up with limited consciousness. Because if we had complete consciousness, then we wouldn't be individuals. We'd be back in the source itself. In order to think of us as individuals, we have to have a limitation of consciousness. So we are consciousness with a small c. And that is the basis for the law of attraction and law of manifestation, that we do have some effect over how the world around us and how our own personal experience happens. And the higher that we rise back up onto that consciousness ladder, the more effect and the more control you will see in your life.
Right. And because essentially, we are a part of that. So if we are able to, really understand that at a deep level, we understand that we're all part of the same energy field. That's just sort of divided itself into all these, millions and millions of beings that are here. Then clearly we as part of that whole can effectuate that because we're part of it. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think Judeo-Christianity has done us a great disservice because they presented us a picture where we're like these separate creations
Mm-hmm.
from the creator. We're like these we're kind of these little clay dolls made out of the dust of the earth, and they wound us up and they put us in this lunatic asylum down here, and we're bouncing around not knowing what the hell we're doing. Oh, and by the way, we kind of sinned right from the beginning, and we pissed off the creator, and now we're forever trying to get back in his good graces. That's the sad picture of
Mm-hmm.
humanity in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the Gnostic tradition, they say, no, that's not the case. We are not creations. Okay, Pinocchio was a creation of Geppetto. Geppetto was the creator. Okay, but that's a creation. We are not creation. We are emanations. We are actual projections of this divine consciousness, of this higher consciousness itself, albeit in diluted form. But there is no separation between
Mm-hmm.
us. There's only an apparent separation because our consciousness is limited. But we really are part of this. You know what I liken it to? Think of a mountain stream up in the mountains, and it's pure, and it flows down the mountain in like a waterfall. And as it flows down, it picks up contaminants. It picks up mud and other contaminants. So by the time it hits the bottom, it's a little murky. Okay. Well, we're that murky condition down the bottom, but the stream that put us there, we're all part of that stream. You see, the higher you go up, the purer that source gets. So, we're kind of down here mucking around in the mud, trying to figure out what's going on. But we do have that ability. You can trace your source of consciousness back closer to its origin, and the more you do that, the more it's going to help your life out.
Interesting. So when you say that you can trace it back, like, are you saying an individual person can trace it like an ancestry type thing, or what? How do you go about that?
Well, I mean, I've never really thought of it in ancestry terms, but what I do believe is that we are multi-dimensional creatures in a multiverse. So there's different iterations of us throughout this multiverse.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when we meditate and we're trying to rise to a higher consciousness, what we're really doing is we're talking to ourselves.
Yeah.
We're talking to ourselves at a higher level of understanding. Yeah. But of course, there's other sources even above that. It's like I say, it's kind of like working your way through a dimensional ladder. Now, there's also dark aspects to that. There is a contention in life. Everybody feels that life is about opposition, and the reason we have opposition in our lives is so that we grow beyond that opposition. It's something that forces us to grow, because sometimes stuff happens that's so terrible that we have to change our whole paradigm, and it forces us to look. Some people need a knock on the head in order to awaken, or to start in the path of awakening. And life has a way of doing that. And incidentally, in the original Judeo-Christian tradition, Satan was not this cloven-hoofed evil being with horns and everything. Satan was the angel of opposition, and he was placed in the hierarchy of things in order for humanity to rise above him, to rise above that influence. So how it is, opposition. It's the hard times that make you grow. If you just sat there and everything was easy, you'd just kind of be oblivious to everything. But it's the hard times that really force you onto different directions. And our purpose here really is to reawaken. I think of us as having a very noble cause as human beings. We are the fingers of God touching the face of this earth. And our purpose is to spiritualize the material and bring the experience of the material back to spirit, which otherwise would not have understood what it's like to be in a physical form. So it's like a communication chain. It's a symbiotic relationship. And we're like the bridge between spirit and matter as human beings. Now, we're not conscious of that, and our task is to grow into the consciousness of that. So we become more aware of our role in the process, and that is that helps us here, and that helps us in the afterlife.
So essentially what you're saying is that Satan is really like our challenges, and it's really just the things that are kind of put in our path, the contrast, if you will, that we have, the hurdles ultimately that we have to overcome. And the only way to overcome those is to grow ourselves spiritually, and so that we can conquer those things. But then ultimately, there'll be other challenges as you continue to ascend in your spiritual pursuits. You'll be presented with other challenges that you need to grow into the next thing and the next thing.
I always say great light attracts great darkness. So, you will encounter bumps on your spiritual path. And the more you become enlightened, sometimes these retardant forces, start working into overtime to present you these challenges. I mean, there is such a thing as evil in the world, but evil to me is when you are so divorced from your understanding of your unity with the source and with other beings that you get to the point where you can harm them, you can harm other people and other things, and not because you're disconnected, you don't feel your unity with them, so you act on your own ego basis and hurt them. I mean, when you see what's happening now in Israel, which is horrible, I mean, the people that did this are clearly at that point. They're so detached from any understanding, and their idea of God is so perverse that they can go and they can do the horrible things that they did and not feel the remorse because they're disconnected. They're in that outer realm of darkness in terms of consciousness.
Yeah. Oh, it's horrific. But for most of us that aren't, really dealing with that, but we are dealing with our own challenges. And so you said that the challenges are kind of like that. If you're a light force, and your light is going to attract darkness, which I feel like I have sort of attracted that myself, with with the coming out of this app that's been going on for much, much, much too long, and just flat out hiring the wrong people, and just not really being able to ever divorce myself of this project. It's like, what does one do when they meet such an opposition to their, I mean, how does one ascend past these kinds of, challenges? I mean, other people having their own challenges, people, dealing with sickness, or people dealing with, bad relationships, or people dealing with financial issues and all of that. Like, how does one take a more of a quantum spiritual approach to dealing with these things?
Well, I think the first thing is to have an intention to grow beyond those things, and then to understand that there's a force that permeates creation, and that force is good. And I mean, look, some people, in order to cope, they'll recite the formula, I accept the Lord Jesus Christ as my personal savior. And I have no problem with that. I don't think it's very effective because I think it's kind of a rote mechanism that makes up for real understanding. It's like, people convince you that if you repeat that, something's going to happen. I think it's something has to be more heartfelt, or more personally experienced than just mouthing certain words. So I think that if you have an intention to grow beyond your circumstances, and you're seeking this higher force, and incidentally, there's ways to do it. Certainly meditation is one of the very best ways that you can get in touch with this, so we can talk about that later. But I think that the way you overcome those things, Victoria, is by speaking your truth. But you have to understand the truth before you speak it. If you go with good intentions, if you're in a situation and your situation involves good intentions towards other people, you're not trying to cheat or harm or hurt anybody, and what you're trying to do has a purpose that's not only for yourself, but particularly it's beneficial to a wider group or wider audience of people, then you're coming from a place of truth. And if you stick with that, and you use all your mental and emotional resources to further those aims, to further that intention, you're probably going to end up in the right place. I mean, I just went through a very, very difficult project in Miami, where I was literally looking at an entire urban renewal for an area of Miami that has become really problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And our opponents were, I mean, literally just slinging all kinds of mud, mischaracterizing the project, outright lying, using scare tactics to induce people to sign, petitions. But we stuck with our guns because we knew what we had wasn't just beneficial for us, but it was beneficial for a much larger group of people. It was, and the community came up huge behind us, which was one of the reasons why we succeeded in the end. And we stuck to our truth. We stood in our truth, and we felt we were doing the right thing. Our entire team was inspired by the fact that we were doing something that was going to be a legacy beyond ourselves to help other people. And when you're doing something, particularly with a consciousness of helping others, not just helping yourself, but helping others, that puts you in a position of power.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I because ultimately the positive energy is far stronger than the negative energy.
Yeah, the negative, look, we created our own Satans in our mind. I mean, if there is an evil force out there, it's a projection of our own shadow. It's a projection of our own confusion, lack of understanding, and placing, our ego or self-gratification over an understanding of how we're connected with a larger community. And I think there's a chapter in the Gospel of Philip, one of the Gnostic Gospels, that it said that men created gods. Now gods rule over men. Something I'm paraphrasing right now, but what he's really saying is that the whole idea of gods and are an extension of our own fallacy. So like the Greek gods, for instance, you think of how nasty they could be. Okay, well, that was because humans could be nasty to one another. Okay, that's a very base consciousness, and they projected that base consciousness into a whole pantheon of gods with these nasty little traits, with these capricious traits. You never knew whether the gods were going to stab you in the back or they were going to elevate you in some way. That's all anthropomorphizing human fallacies into gods. So ultimately it really is each of our responsibility to try and grow in consciousness. And I think when enough people really get to that point, a lot of problems start to fade away, fears and misunderstandings.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because, kind of getting back to the source, if, we're ultimately growing as a, society, if everybody's growing and everybody's getting, and as you grow, you're getting closer to that source, then, ultimately more good is going into that. And so we're elevating as a whole.
Well, yeah. Now, look, so far we've talked a lot in kind of metaphysical terms, but I always like to bring it down to scientific terms also. And everything we're saying here has a basis in quantum physics. So I won't go into a whole lecture about what quantum physics is all about, because that would take a lot of time. And I can see your show is not exactly oriented towards that aspect of it, but I think it's very important that people understand that there is a scientific basis for everything we're saying. And I spell that out, pretty clearly in my book. And, the father of quantum physics, Max Planck, said that I can assure you that there's no such thing as matter, that behind the appearance of matter is a conscious, intelligent mind that brings an atom or a molecule to vibration that we recognize as matter. But what really is out there is a quantum field of energy. It's light energy. Now, that's not metaphysical BS. Everybody will tell you in modern quantum physics that there are no such things as particles. So these things that we think are solid aren't solid at all. And what really exists at the most fundamental level of reality is a wave of quantum light energy. And under certain circumstances, that energy can collapse into particle form. So, it forms like we're basically, what we are is we're a blip in the screen. We're like a cul-de-sac from that light energy. We are composed of light energy. I mean, again, that's another fact. Einstein's E equals mc squared says that matter and energy are the same thing. They are interchangeable. And matter is simply energy that is coagulated or densified down to a certain point where it's recognized as matter. But matter resolves back into energy. That's the whole basis of, if you saw Oppenheimer, that is the whole basis of the nuclear bomb. It's essentially splitting the atom into its natural state of energy and releasing that energy back to its source. So we are energetic beings that think we're physical, but we really and truly are beings and beings of energy. And scientists today, there is a definite movement in science today where more and more scientists are coming to the conclusion that conscious energy is what makes up the entire universe and everything in it. It's called panpsychism. It has different names, but this is running counter to the traditional scientific view that life is just an accident of particles, that particles are predominant, and that somehow it's particles that led to life and consciousness. It's just the other way around. It's conscious light energy that led to the occurrence of particles, because at the fundamental level, particles don't exist.
It makes perfect sense. And I mean, everything, we always hear this, ultimately everything is energy. And I totally agree with that. And when quantum physicists, study all the things that seem like they're matter, everything's just moving at a fast or a slower vibration. And so tell us a little bit, though, how we, can take that information and, and make that to our advantage.
Okay. Well, number one, you have to have intention. You have to be motivated, and you have to have some intention on your part or on somebody's part to experience something that is higher than your present state of consciousness. Mm-hmm. Okay. You have to have a yearning to connect with something higher than yourself. Now, again, I can't motivate people. Let me take that back. What my book does is it tries to create a roadmap using both science and spiritual wisdom to create an arena of knowledge and show people how all the dots are connected, and get their right brains and their left brains working in unison, so that the logically minded person can start to understand the spiritual aspect, and the spiritual minded person can start to understand the scientific aspect. And when they see that it's pointing in the same direction and those dots are connecting, it's inspirational, because where there's smoke, there's fire, right? We can say, well, we never know for sure. Well, maybe you don't, but the more you have the experiences, you really start to feel that there's something else out there. I mean, to me, this other world, these other dimensions that we don't see, we're talking about, I lived in them. I mean, I know they're real, but I can't convince you of that until you have your own experience with it. So all I can do is give you a roadmap with signposts that help guide you along the way, but you have to exert some intent and some motivation to follow that path, and examine that knowledge, study that, and say, hey, you know what, maybe I can use some of this information in my own meditation. I can start thinking about it more, because the law of attraction, the more you think about something, the more you dwell on something, the more it tends to manifest, the more it tends to become part of your personal reality.
Absolutely. So first you would start by, just having an intention and a motivation. Is there a particular way that you suggest that we incorporate that into our meditations?
Well, again, I people, like I said, people arrive on a spiritual journey from different paths, and I can't recreate the path that I went through. I was maybe one of those unusual people that this happened to me spontaneously. It was like the universe is saying, I'm
Yeah.
going to put you in a certain direction and you better pay attention. And they gave me enough information to pay attention. Okay. Now, I don't think too many people, now maybe more than I think, but I don't know. Most people that I meet, that's not really their thing. It happens when, a lot of times, like I say, when you hit the bottom of the barrel and you start searching and you start seeking. Now, I noticed quite a few people who start off as Pentecostalists, as fundamentalists, graduate to spiritual churches like Unity or Centers for Conscious Living or whatever. They start going there because they're saying, well, the formula, the fundamentalist formula helped me for a little while, but it didn't really do it, because it has its own drawbacks. And they graduated to more spiritual seeking. So a lot of, that's the way it happens to a lot of people. Some people can even arrive at it intellectually. They study scriptures, they study books like mine, and they say, I want to experiment with that. I think there's something to this. So there's a lot of ways that you can arrive at this, but in the book, I go over probably a dozen or so factors that help people in meditation, visualization, imagination, how to harness desire, different factors like that really help people propel their own personal meditation. But again, it's like anything else. You got to put some work into it yourself. It's not going to get handed to you.
Absolutely. And, on that note, I mean, it whether it's the law of attraction, whether it's meditation, whether it's, just, wanting to become a, new and improved, better person, you always have to have, some kind of personal intention, and you always have to put some kind of work into it. Um, So on that note, is there anything else that you'd like to leave our listeners with knowing, other than, we'll talk about where they can get your book and, what some of the benefits are that they would gain from reading that. But anything else that you think would be worth our listeners understanding on this principle?
Well, I mean, I can only say in general that extraordinary experiences with higher consciousness are definitely attainable. A lot of people have done it to varying degrees, and listening to a program like this is probably a very good first step. I think that the more you seek and you get information, and not just from me, from people like yourself or from other people who I have interviews with, really go on that path, be a little bit studious about it. And the more you start to learn, and again, it's all a matter of connecting dots. Life is a mystery, and the more dots you connect, and the more of those jagged edge puzzle pieces that you see fit with one another, the more you're on the road to something. So it's a process, okay? It's not something that happens overnight. I mean, like I say, I was a little bit exceptional in the sense that I had this sudden, kind of gnostic revelation. But I think for most people, it's more a question of a process. But the process is really worth it, and there's a payoff at the end of that rainbow. And like I say, I go back to what I said originally, which is, make a decision. You want to live in the basement, or do you want to live in the penthouse? And if you live in the penthouse, you get a much more panoramic view of the way life operates.
Ooh, yes. On that, well, that sounds like a really good benefit and a really good payoff for starting on this path. And many of us here have started on the path, but maybe by reading your book and getting to know a little bit more about the quantum spiritual world, people can maybe accelerate that process a little bit more. And so once again, you can read or you can learn all about Peter by going to his website, petercanova.com. And tell us just a little bit more about the book, Quantum Spirituality, which is available on Amazon. What ultimately will our listeners learn how to do in that book?
Well, it's really kind of a tour de force of creation and reality. And it approaches it from a number of different disciplines and viewpoints. And that's what makes the book so interesting. So it's not only just quantum physics and spiritual wisdom, ancient spiritual wisdom, but Jungian depth psychology. There's chapters on Carl Jung and how Carl Jung essentially was nothing more than a rediscovery of Gnostic principles 3,000 years ago. So that it all ties in. The Gnostics actually not only predicted all the modern theories of quantum physics, they predicted almost everything that Carl Jung said. And Carl Jung acknowledged that. When he first read the Gnostic text, he said, they got there before me. And so it approaches things from a psychological standpoint. I go into even things like neurophysiology, like how light is the basis for us understanding reality, and how light plays off of things and goes through a physical process through our eyes and our brains and everything else, and how it creates the 3D world around us. And that really our consciousness, there would be no 3D world around us without us as the mediums of focusing this light. And so it approaches it through so many different ways and so many different disciplines. And the power of this book, like I said earlier, is connecting all these dots. And most of us, look, all of us have a right and left brain. Now, some of us, more of us dominate to one side than the other. Some people who are logical and analytic are more left brain. Those who are more feeling and intuitive are right brain. And there's probably a lot more of the former than the latter. But I think the most powerful thing is when you get both of those sides activated together and working in unison. And if you read the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, a couple thousand years old, it has Jesus saying in there, when the male becomes the female and the female becomes the male and the two become one, then will you experience the kingdom of heaven. So we know that the ancients also said that we have the male and the female in each of us. Carl Jung said we have the anima and the animus, the male and the female and the male. What they were talking about were the right and the left brain, essentially, and these characteristics. And when we merge these characteristics and we use them both in unison as opposed to one way more than the other, then Carl Jung said we become actualized human beings. What he meant by that was we become enlightened consciousness, sources of consciousness. So the book covers all these things from so many different angles that I think almost anybody of any orientation will find something in there of interest to them.
I absolutely agree with that. It sounds like a really fascinating read. It sounds like something that, I mean, even just on an intellectual level, but also, just it seems like it's something that could help you advance in your personal development and your spirituality. And so, I'd recommend you guys check that out. It's called Quantum Spirituality and Mysticism, Connecting Consciousness, and it's available on Amazon. And you can also find out more about Peter again by going to his website, petercanova.com. And so thank you so much for all of your worldly information, and it's really been enlightening and fascinating, and probably just, ask you questions for, the next 10 hours and probably not scratch the surface of everything that you've, been experiencing. So I really appreciate you coming on the show and enlightening us with, some of your knowledge.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about some of these things. That's what I enjoy doing, and hopefully it helps people.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, it definitely has. It's helped me already, and I'm sure that it's, going to definitely help our audience. So thank you again.